Alright everybody, we are out today in sort of southeastern Iowa. We're standing in Cedar Bluff State Preserve in Mahaska County. It's a nice, comfortable afternoon on September 2nd. Going to take a look at some forest species down here. Cedar Bluff State Preserve is about 220 acres or so of land that's protected here, kind of on the south side of the Des Moines River Valley. About half of it, or maybe a little bit more, 120 acres, is primarily forested. The rest of it's upland areas, either old hayfields or some areas are being planted up to a prairie. The preserve is pretty well dissected. It's got quite a bit of topography, and it's situated into a sandstone substrate. So the bedrock geology here is probably some Pennsylvania sandstones. It overlooks Cedar Creek, hence the name of the site. Cedar Creek is a stream now that occupies a former riverbed or channel of the Des Moines River. So we're going to take a look at three species right here on the trail. We'll zoom in first here on a real common goldenrod. This one right here, there's several plants all around us here. We'll be looking at probably several species of goldenrod today, since goldenrods are kind of coming into their flowering period now, and we'll be looking at sort of end of season species. So the goldenrods are pretty easy to distinguish as a group as solidago. They have the yellow, small yellow flowers. If you really look at those closely under a scope or with a hand lens, they are similar to aster flowers, for example. They have ray flowers and disc flowers. They're just really small, so that's one thing that makes them kind of hard as a group. This one, however, I think is pretty distinctive as goldenrods go, at least when it's in flower like this. It's called elm leaf goldenrod, Solidago ulmifolia, in part because the leaves down here, you can pull one off here, do have a resemblance to elm leaves, with their shape and serrations along the edge. And then, without even looking at the flowers closely, the florets, the branching aspect of the inflorescence here, with these long spreading inflorescences here, with flowers again occurring along the branches, that is pretty distinctive. I can't really think of any other goldenrods that are going to have an inflorescence structure that resembles that. So you could be pretty sure when you see elm leaf goldenrod. The other one that we're going to take a look at here is a little bit smaller. I'll point to it right here. This is one that we did look at out in Preparation Canyon State Park a couple times ago. So it was back in July. But it was vegetative at the time. Now we can see it's got flowers. This too is in the same family as the goldenrods. It's in the Asteraceae, but it only has disc flowers rather than both ray and disc flowers. This one just has disc flowers. This is white snakeroot. I learned it originally as Eupatorium rugosum, and now it is treated in Flora of North America as Ageratina altissimum. So this species is often very ubiquitous in forest systems. Not seeing a whole lot right here on the trail, but you can certainly run into some forest habitats where this is about everywhere you look. And has those white flowers, again very small head there. When we're looking at one of these, this white area here, for example, we're looking at a single head inflorescence, and in that single head inflorescence there's going to be multiple, probably maybe a dozen or so at least, disc flowers, really small disc florets. White snakeroot, Ageratina altissimum. Leaf-wise, it is pretty distinctive too. It's got opposite leaves with very distinct petioles. I kind of think its leaf shape is pretty distinctive, large serrations. I think I mentioned out in Preparation Canyon, I don't see it on these, but quite often on white snakeroot leaves you see evidence of leaf miners, little larval insects inside the mesophyll of the leaf, making a tunnel through the leaves. These don't have any right here, but it is pretty common to see those on that species. Alright, and then we'll look at one more species. We'll have to move across the trail here, and I'll kind of get down here by it, show you what we're looking at here if we can. Get out of the light. You might recognize this as a bedstraw. If you remember, bedstraws have whorls of leaves, 3 or more leaves coming off the same node, off the same point along the stem. This one looks like it's got generally 6 leaves, and it's real sticky, like many bedstraws are. I can kind of feel some downward curved hairs, stout hairs, kind of sharp little hairs. I can feel them on the stem. There's a kind of a shiny aspect to it too, hence the name shining bedstraw. When we got the leaves in some good light, it's kind of a shiny green. Try and get out of the way of the light here a little bit. Shining bedstraw. This is Galium continuum. Among the bedstraws, I think we've looked at Cleaver's bedstraw at least already, and I think maybe we saw sweet-scented bedstraw last time. This one is a bit more conservative, I think, and usually is found in a little bit more pristine forest systems. Don't have any flowers here, but they wouldn't help much anyway because, again, the bedstraw flowers are very, very small white flowers. You kind of do this one again by its general leaf morphology and the stickiness, the hairs that are on the stems. It can kind of catch your skin. They feel kind of sharp. We've moved into the preserve and kind of gone down in elevation a little bit and found a few more species we can share with you. Another goldenrod. As I suspected, there'll be a few goldenrods to look at today. This one I think we actually did talk about way back on the first one of these tours, but it was just vegetative. Here's a couple of plants right here. This one is called zigzag goldenrod, Solidago flexicalis. And you can actually see a bit of a zigzag growth pattern to the stem here as it kind of zigzags between each of the nodes. These are pretty distinctive with their really broadly elliptical, I would call, broadly elliptical leaves here, really broad across the midsection here. You got some really big teeth on the edges here. You can see the flowers are not quite yet all the way open, but they're coming along here in the axils of the leaves here. There's little clusters of heads in the axils of these leaves here. They will be yellow, like most goldenrods, and again be small. Difficult to see the actual florets. Solidago flexicalis, zigzag goldenrod. Another, I think, fairly nice and pretty conservative species, good indicator of fairly decent forest, in my experience. Alright, we're going to see some ferns here too, so let's start with this one right here. This one has broad, sort of elongate fronds. There's only a couple fronds here, so I'm not going to pull them out, but you can see them here a little bit better now. So remember again, a fern, when we see a fern plant like this, we're looking at the leaves. The stem is below ground as a rhizome, either a short little rhizome usually a short one. That's why the leaves are kind of clumped together. This is Goldie's fern, Dryopteris goldiana. Nice, again, forest species. This one I think is sort of at its maybe most southern range or distribution in Iowa down here at Cedar Bluffs. So the gestalt of this frond, it's got pretty robust frond, I would say, and the divisions of the frond here, these leaves, this is the entire leaf, of course, again, but the divisions of the fern frond, the leaf, are pretty large. We call these pinna, and so most ferns are divided several times. So this is one division here, and then they're also divided into smaller segments right here. The point here being, again, the segments are pretty large as fern divisions go. All ferns produce spores. That's certainly true. Most of them produce spores in sporangia, and many of them produce these sporangia in little clusters on the bottom side of the frond, on these pinna. You can see them as little brown dots probably now. Those are clusters of little sporangia that either have or will release spores. In Goldie's fern here you can see the cluster of sporangia, which is called a sorus. So the entire brown dot is a sorus. And a sorus contains usually several sporangia. You can see the sori here are kind of just roundish, circular in shape, kind of lined up in a couple rows, going the full length of the pinnuole. So again, the pinnuole is the smallest division of the fern frond. And that's this is helpful again in the ID of this species. You can catch them when they have sporangia present. Another thing that I've noticed is that usually helps at least draw your attention to Goldie fern here is, as you see, moving up towards the tip of the frond here, there's kind of a rapid reduction in size here of these pinna to very, very small pinna here at the very tip. So the pinna are just kind of gradually getting smaller, and all of a sudden they reduce in size very, very quickly and kind of drastically, forming kind of a distinctive arrowhead shaped or lance shaped kind of tip on these fronds. That's in contrast to another real common fern you find in many forests across Iowa. This one right here, which is lady fern. Lady fern, here's a frond I collected earlier. The pinnuoles and pinna on this one are finer in their size and shape. You can see they're not as broad. Kind of a little bit more of a fine or lacy kind of look to it. Another thing that's helpful for lady fern is this portion of the frond here. It's called the stipe. This one isn't the best example, but I did look at this with my hand lens, and you can see some. Often there's quite a few little brown scales that can be seen down through here on the lower portion of the frond. When you look at the ventral side again of a pinna here, again we can see, you should be able to see the little brown specks maybe again. If you look at those more closely with a hand lens, those sori are a little bit more elongate and crescent shaped. So rather than being circular like in Goldie's fern, these are have a little different shape to them. Lady's fern, Ethereum Felix femina, probably a little bit more common, I think, just in general than Goldie's fern. and maybe not quite as conservative. Both are very nice ferns. I've even gone further down into the valley. We're down on a small alluvial stream down here, getting into the domain of wood nettles, one of the species we'll take a quick look at here. Before we do that though, here's another species that often grows right next with wood nettles or in the same community. This touch-me-not or jewelweed. This is the yellow flowered one, as you can see there. That's Impatiens pallida. They have a very beautiful flower, I think, that dangles down there below the leaves. You have a pedicel that's attached there to where the axil of the leaf is. So two species of jewelweed or touch-me-not. One of them is the yellow flowered one and the other one is more orange. And again, this one is pale, I think is the common name most people use, pale touch-me-not, Impatiens pallida. Right across the trail here from it is some wood nettle that's in flower. I think we may have talked about wood nettle already out at Preparation Canyon State Park. It wasn't in flower at the time, so here we can see the very not very showy, of course, not very conspicuous flowers. All nettle species in the nettle family tend to look that way. But a branching inflorescence here towards the top of the plant. The leaves that are alternate on very long petioles. Look how long that petiole is there. Very long petioles. Large, I would describe that as ovate or egg-shaped. Broadest near the base, very broad across the center here. Ovate-shaped leaves. Again, pretty distinctive species, just vegetatively or with the leaf morphology. Again, one that you want to avoid most of the time, at least if you can. The little trichomes or hairs on the stem mainly, maybe some on the petioles, are capable of injecting some toxin, I guess you would call it. And of course that's what causes the stinging sensation, the pain, if you happen to get stung by this. If you do though, it's very handy often to have that wood nettle and touch-me-nots or jewelweed grow often side by side, because again the antidote for the stinging sensation caused by the wood nettle is to take a branch, maybe a branch in the middle part of the stem, someplace on the jewelweed, break off a branch and squeeze some of the sap, the watery sap, out of that branch, or just rub that squish branch and that watery sap onto the area that is where you feel the pain, where you got stung by the wood nettle, and it will definitely soothe that pain. I've used it many times. Lots of both species right here in front of us. Alright, we're moved further into the preserve, crossed over the little stream, climbed up, back up into the uplands, and here's a great example of one we've been seeing all along, but this is the best example that we've come across here. It's a lopseed, Phryma leptostachya is the scientific name. It's at the end of the season, of course, but you can really see how this plant goes about making flowers and fruits. These are all little fruits here now that are kind of pointing downwards and tightly pressed against the stem there. That's where the flowers were previously. And flowers again, the ovary of the flower becomes the fruit. So lots of fruits there. This is a nice, large, really healthy plant. Again, the really branching aspect of this plant, the inflorescence that's got this branching aspect, lots of small flowers, usually again along the upper portion of these branches when it's in flower, and now these pretty distinctive fruits. Hard to mistake those for anything else once you learn it. This plant has opposite leaves. The leaves are a little bit wilted down here, but leaves are opposite, broadly ovate. Sometimes when this is just vegetatively, you don't have anything other than just the stem and leaves, it can look a little bit like that white snake root that we looked at earlier, but the leaves are very different in that white snake root will have three main veins. It'll have the main central vein, and then there'll be very clearly two larger veins that come from the base and go out this direction. White snake root has that, and this of course does not. This just has the one main central vein. So you can distinguish it from white snake root at that time. Prima leptostachya, lop seed. Here's a nice one. This is Prinanthus alba. White lettuce is one of the common names for it. We're on a fairly steep west-facing slope here, so fairly dry. Here's the flowers up here. This is a lettuce, so it's in the Asteraceae. And like all lettuces, it just has ray flowers. Those are just some ray flowers there. Small cluster in that head inflorescence, kind of nodding or bent over, pointing downward there. The leaves are pretty distinctive on this plant. You can see as we go down, the leaves get a little bit larger and get more sort of broadly triangular. Here's the lower one right here. It's got this really broad triangular overall shape with quite a few lobes in it, and there's always usually two basal lobes here at the base of the leaf that are larger and more distinctive. There's another one here. This one's a little bit beat up down here, but they keep getting larger as you go down and have, and here you can really see this one's got very large basal lobes here. Almost just three main large lobes. Yeah, that large sort of triangular, highly lobed shape is pretty distinctive for Prinanthus. Prinanthus alba. A couple other Prinanthus species that we could find in Iowa that grow in prairies. This one is a forest species. All right, we're going to take a look at a couple more ferns. We're looking at rattlesnake fern right here, this plant. It's got three main divisions here. The frond comes up. Again, this is just a single leaf coming up from a rhizome. And then it divides into three main sections here. Now, unlike the lady fern and Godey's fern, we saw the sori, the location of the sporangia, on the bottom side of the fronds, on the bottom side of the pinna. This one is a little bit different. It has a separate branching portion of this leaf here. This is really dried out and kind of past its prime, so it's not a very good example, but you can see, I think you can see this portion of the leaf right here. This is called a sporophore, because this is where the spores are produced. So the spores are produced in little sporangia towards the tip of this. They're all kind of brown and dried out right now, so it's kind of past its prime. But you can see that, again, quite a difference in terms of the reproduction and where the spores are formed. Then right next to it over here is another very common fern found in forest ecosystems. This one is really distinctive. Once you learn this one, you can't really mistake this for anything else. This is maidenhair fern, Adiantum pedatum. So you can kind of see it has a very distinctive division to the frond here, where it comes up in branches into two branches, and then there's separate branches that come off all on one side. There's a branch coming off there, there, and there. These branches kind of curve, the two main branches kind of curve around, and again, branches coming off here as well. So it makes this very distinctive shape, and the branches themselves, or I shouldn't really call them branches because this is all one leaf. The rachis here is kind of a wiry texture, dark in color. The sori on this species are on the bottom side. They're going to be found on the underside of the pinna. These are usually found right along the edge. They're not usually quite as easy to see as those other sporangia were. They're kind of tucked under the edge of the pinna, kind of curls over and kind of conceals them. I'm not sure if there's any there actually right here on any of these, but that's where you would find them. Maidenhair fern. We're going to take a look at one more forest species here. We found this hog peanut growing along the trail here. The hog peanut is in the bean or legume family, and like most many legume species, it's got compound leaves with 3 leaflets. We call that trifoliate. Hog peanut is a climbing plant, and ecologists use 2 terms to kind of separate climbing plants. Those that are herbaceous we call vines, so that's what hog peanut would be, because it's a herbaceous climbing plant. If the climbing plant is woody, we use the term liana. Climbing plants have various adaptations to help them grow up and onto other plants, of course, to gain more height and access to sunlight without investing quite as much tissue and energy into strong stems. So hog peanut wraps the stem around other existing plants. This is a dried and dead cane of a blackberry here, and you can see again the leaflets of the hog peanut stems wrapping around, and in the axils of these leaves are little clusters of flowers, these white flowers. Hog peanut is Amphicarpia bracteata. It can be pretty common, and in some places almost bordering on invasiveness, I suppose you might say, if it kind of gets out of hand. It's an annual plant, so it comes up from seed each year.